Hi. So today I'm just going to chat to you a little bit about wedding traditions. Now, it's occurred to me when I was looking back through my blog and about my podcast, one of the things I've not really discussed particularly in detail is British wedding traditions. And the thing is, wedding traditions have changed over the years and are continuing to change, and in fact, probably are changing more now than they ever have done before. So, as a result, I thought I would just chat to you a little bit about British wedding traditions and I guess also the changing nature of wedding culture here in the UK. So there are loads and loads and loads of traditions. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm just going to talk about my couple of key favourites for the wedding day itself. So the first one is the white dress. Why do brides wear a white dress? Well, this tradition actually hasn't really been going on that long, to be honest. In the old days, ladies didn't have the luxury of many dresses, and they certainly didn't have the luxury of buying a new dress for their wedding. So actually what most brides wore was their best dress, their Sunday best, as they would have called it. And that dress could have been in any colour. It could have been black, it could have been red, it could have been green, blue, whatever. So there wasn't a specific trend of white dresses up until the time that Queen Victoria got married. So in 1840, Queen Victoria married Prince Albert, and she actually wore a white dress. And this was the first time it had happened. And she was clearly a bit of a trendsetter in her time, and that took off. And as a result, white, or over recent sort of years, ivory dresses have become a lot more popular. Whilst white was the only colour that people wore for a long time, people realised that it didn't really invariably match their skin tones, and it made people look kind of washed out, and ultimately on your wedding day you want to look fabulous. You don't want to look a little bit washed out. So as a result, ivory became the main trend. And now I know for a fact, having spoken to many wedding dress shops, that invariably they don't even carry white dresses anymore because nobody actually buys them. Sometimes they just have one, a token white dress, but often not. Ivory is definitely more popular. But to be quite honest, and this is fab, I love this, there's more of a nod these days towards coloured wedding dresses. So generally they're kind of pale, blush pinks, peach, even a very pale blue, green not so much, but a lot of these sort of blush colours are more popular, and then every so often I did a wedding last year and the bride wore black, and it was awesome. It was a fantastic dress. I've done another wedding where, although the dress was white at the top, it was a bit of an ombre, so it was shocking pink at the bottom. It was fantastic. So there's just so much you can do, and people are looking at different things now, because not everybody wants to wear white or ivory. So there are a lot more dresses with flowers, with all different kinds of things, and that's wonderful. So whilst I think that white or ivory dresses are still a very popular trend and will still, for many, many years to come, probably be the mainstay of the wedding bridal business, there's definitely more and more colour coming through. And I think that's partly because people want to do something different. They don't want to be traditional, or quite often because they've been married before, and now with the emergence of, obviously, the fact that the law has changed and now we can have same-sex weddings, sometimes if two brides are both wanting to wear a dress, they don't necessarily both want to wear white. They want to wear something different. There's so many more opportunities to do exactly what you want to do with dresses. So will the white wedding dress still be here in another 50 years' time? I don't know. But it's certainly the trend still. Okie doke. And my next trend and tradition that I'm talking about is giving the bride away. So historically, the father of the bride would always escort his daughter down the aisle and give her away effectively to her new husband. Now, Again, this is still done today, but yeah, less so. More often, especially again with second or subsequent weddings, the bride's son or daughter might give them away. Maybe their sibling, maybe their mum. I think a lot of the time when parents have split up, if they haven't really spent much time growing up with their dad, then and their mum has always been there for them, then why not ask their mum to walk them down the aisle? It's wonderful. And I think as well, quite a lot of the time, if sometimes one parent has passed away, it does mean that that the bride will often ask somebody else. But this tradition, where does giving the bride away come from? Well, basically, it dates back to the Middle Ages, where women were effectively sold by their father, usually for a large dowry, or land, or titles, or combination of the above, and sold to their new husband. So yeah, they were effectively their father's property until they were handed over. So as a result, that I guess is a good reason why a lot of people choose not to be walked down the aisle. And then really, really famously last year, of course, Meghan Markle walked down the aisle on her own, which was, a really big deal for any kind of public wedding, especially a royal wedding. And what a fantastic statement for women. But she walked herself, and then just had her train carried by the gorgeous little flower girls and page boys. But yeah, so yeah, definitely a tradition that has changed and is changing, and I think will continue to change. Okay, the next one. I like this one. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, and a silver sixpence in her shoe. So traditionally, the bride has always worn something from each of these kind of elements of the poem. Something old is usually an heirloom, so that would be something that maybe the bride's mum or grandma or aunt gives her, possibly a piece of jewellery or a brooch, a hair adornment, something of that nature. But the significance of the something old is basically to remind the bride of where she comes from, so the family that she comes from. And that's the old. The something new quite often is the bride's dress or maybe her shoes, and that's to represent good fortune and success in the new life that the bride is is entering into. Something borrowed. Now this sometimes kind of is also the something old. So it might well be a piece of jewellery. It might well be maybe something like a handkerchief or a bag or just something small and personal. But the idea of the something borrowed is actually to remind the bride that her family and her friends will always be there for her. So even when she moves into her new life with her husband, then she still has that memory of her family who are always there for her. And something blue, well, this represents faithfulness and loyalty. Back in biblical times, blue was the colour of purity. So it is something that's still used, and often it's done, maybe it's a little ribbon or something that's either stitched into the bride's dress, or maybe the bride's garter is blue or has a blue ribbon on it. But quite often that is something that's still done. Now, the thing that often isn't done these days and is often forgotten about and left off the end of the poem is the silver sixpence in her shoe. Partly because silver sixpences are a little harder to come by these days, partly because it's actually blimmin' uncomfortable wearing a bit of metal in your shoe all day, but brides do it, and actually it's really nice. You can get these days, you can actually buy wedding shoes where the silver sixpence has actually already been embedded into the shoe, so which is really, really special. But basically the idea of the silver sixpence was a gift from the father of the bride to the new couple to represent wealth and happiness. So that's that tradition. Now, to be honest, people do still actually, you do got a lot of those elements, which is lovely, but quite often I think they don't necessarily know the whys and the wherefores. Wedding cake, number 4, wedding cake. Okay, so if you know anything about me or have read any of my blog posts, you'll know the wedding cake is, a key favourite of mine, and yeah, one of my favourite things. So, wedding cakes. Well, who doesn't love a piece of cake with a cup of tea? It's very, very British. But the tradition actually stems from when the groom had to kiss the bride over a pile of sweetbread rolls. And that's a medieval tradition. Goodness only knows why, or why that came about. But this tradition then moved on, and this is very strange, to the bride being given a pie to go under her pillow. I can only assume it's something to do with, having, sort of food and that, and so that they will always be provided for, I would guess. But my gosh, what a messy tradition that was. Fortunately, we've moved on from that and we've moved on to cake. Now, cake. I could talk about cake for hours. But basically, the idea of having the wedding cake with the tiers represent that pile of sweetbread rolls that they would, initially have used. Cakes obviously come in all shapes and sizes these days. Used to be very, very traditional to have fruitcake. I loved fruitcake, but pretty much, the majority of people don't really like fruitcake. So why spend a lot of money on a wedding cake that you're not even going to, you're not going to enjoy because you don't like fruitcake? So the tradition of fruitcake and royal icing, isn't really a thing so much now. But sponge cake is definitely taken over. Basically, you can have it in pretty much any flavour you like. Again, Victoria sponge was always the favourite, but these days it could be anything: salted caramel, chocolate, carrot cake, lemon cake, you name it. And basically, whatever you want to do with it, is yours. Quite often, more and more actually, when people get married and they're able to bring in their own caterers, they use the wedding cake for their dessert, which is lovely. So that just gives them more flexibility with what to do. But cake, yeah, cake is always, there are traditions, there are changes in the tradition of at the moment the trend. We went through a stage of cupcakes. They seem to have gone. We kind of then went into kind of macaron towers. They're still kind of hanging around, but maybe not for much longer. And then, of course, there's donuts. Donuts is the thing at the moment. So once they'll kind of move on. But cake, I think, will always be here. Although, there are people who don't have a sweet tooth, which I really just don't understand. But then the option there is a cheese tower. And that's something that a lot of people have. Now, don't get me wrong, I love cheese, but I love cake too. So I would probably just have both. So yeah, I think that's definitely one tradition that is here to stay in whatever guise that cake looks like. Okay, my next tradition I want to talk about is the first dance. Okay, so dancing has always been a massively popular part of any celebration, any party, birthday, whatever. And of course, weddings are just no exception. So the reason this started as a thing, or the first dance started as a thing, basically when royal balls and large parties were being held, the first dance started off proceedings. So that was that's how the party got going. And usually the guest of honour performed the first dance with the a lady of the house, so the hostess. And this then became a wedding tradition. And the wedding tradition started when the father of the groom would dance with the bride, and then she would dance with her husband. Now, this generally doesn't happen so much, but the first dance between the couple getting married is absolutely still a thing, and usually is the first point at which everyone jumps onto the dance floor, and the party starts. Often until the early hours. So yeah, so I don't see that tradition, going anywhere anytime soon. I definitely think that's here to stay. Okay. Now, my last tradition that I want to talk about is actually kind of two traditions, but I've kind of joined them into one. The first element is the couple not seeing each other before the ceremony. And the other element is why the bride wears a veil. Now, these are both intrinsically linked. It's considered bad luck today to see your future spouse before the ceremony. However, the reasonings behind this were actually quite practical in some respects based on the nature of weddings. It was going back to the days when marriages were often arranged and business transactions between two families, where large dowries of whether that was money, lands, or or titles changed hands as a result of the exchange. More often than not, the couple didn't know each other, had never even met, never even seen each other. So as a result, the bride was often basically kept hidden until the ceremony to risk the, not to risk the groom doing a runner if he didn't look that impressed with his new bride. So he had to commit to the marriage deal first. And so that was basically why they didn't see each other beforehand. And quite often as well, and again, this is still a tradition, the bride's parents, not for the same reasons, covered the bride's face with a veil, again, until the exchange of the I do's had taken place, just to be on the safe side. That's still done in some cases, although not everybody wears a veil, and quite often if brides do wear a veil, it's just one that sort of sits behind their head and doesn't necessarily cover their head. But yeah, so today that both of those things are still popular but becoming less and less expected. Often, obviously, couples live together 99% of the time. Couples live together before their wedding. And so as a result, sometimes they arrive together. Sometimes they come with their children. Sometimes they both come from the house. Who knows? But what is on the increase is a first look shoot. And that's lovely. It's the idea being that the couple see each other before they go into the ceremony, just the two of them and the photographer, and so that the photographer can get the actual effect of that wow moment where they first lay eyes on each other in their outfits for the day, and that's definitely something that's become increasingly popular, and a lovely tradition actually, that's sort of started up. So yeah, there are definitely movements on that tradition, and to be quite honest, on so many traditions, these days. And I'm sure you've got lots of other traditions that that you know about. That please feel free to share and let me know what you did. But one question I get asked all the time is, do I have to follow these traditions? Do I need to do them all? And the answer is just hell no. Of course not. To be quite honest, wedding traditions, whilst quite quaint and fun in some cases, just aren't always realistic for today's couples. As I've discussed, they invariably date back to the days when marriages were a business deal, a business transaction between families, rather than being undertaken because the couple actually fell in love and wanted to get married. So as a result, a lot of these things don't necessarily hold true anymore. And I think as well, obviously with the emergence of second and subsequent marriages being a lot more commonplace today, family setups being very, very different than they were in the past, it does make some traditions just really difficult for people. So my advice is, do what you want to do. It's your wedding. Do it the way you want to do it. You've got to make the day right for you both. And it makes me really sad because people so often say, oh yeah, when I got married, we basically did what was expected and we did what we had to do. But actually I'd like to do it all again now because, it wasn't the day we wanted. And that just breaks my heart. It's such a shame. So my advice would always be, do it the way you want to do it. Have a fabulous day and just pick and choose the traditions you like. Why not? Just, have fun. Okay, I hope that helps, and I will speak to you soon. Bye.